A very good evening to all the participants. I am Swati Agarwal, Assistant Professor in the Department of Journalism, School of Media and Communication, Adamas University. I welcome you all to yet another session of the 7-day Faculty Development Program on application of methodologies in media communication and entertainment research from 6th March to 12th March 2022, which has been organized for the first time by the School of Media and Communication, Adamas University, Kolkata. This session will be conducted by Dr. Anna Keszeg, an eminent researcher in the field of popular culture. Dr. Anna will be joining us from Budapest to share her knowledge about research in popular culture. Let me share some insights on popular culture with you. The term popular culture was coined around in the mid-19th century, and it referred to the cultural traditions of the people and not the culture of the state or the governing classes, or as we say, the elitist culture. Popular culture generally refers to the traditions and material culture of a particular society. It is those practices and beliefs that are dominant or prevalent in a society at a given point in time. More appropriately, the culture of the masses. It is an outcome of the daily interactions, needs, and cultural movements that constitute the everyday lives of the mainstream and is the threshold of the creation of their cultural identity. Research in popular culture is the study of the popular culture from a critical theory perspective, which deepens our understanding of the society around us. To discuss more about culture or popular culture, we have with us today Dr. Anna. Dr. Anna is presently working as an associate professor at Moholy-Nagy University of Arts and Design, Budapest. She was earlier associated with Budapest University, Romania, and Metropolitan University, Budapest, as an assistant professor, and she has visited many countries and interacted with students of diverse cultures. Her main area of research is fashion studies, contemporary popular culture, and main tendencies in entertainment industries. She defended her habilitation thesis in 2019. Her main research interest is how globalization interacts with local knowledge. She is a passionate researcher and the author of 4 books and a number of research papers in Hungarian. Her articles have been published by reputed journals like European Review, Journal of European Popular Culture, etc. Madam, I welcome you to the Faculty Development Program conducted by the School of Media and Communication. We can't thank you enough for joining us. So, ma'am, over to you.
Thank you, Swati, so much for this introduction, and thank you for sharing some ideas on popular culture also. So I have to say that I already have been in Kolkata, and I have very good memories regarding the city, regarding your university. So I hope that you are well and you had some very fruitful lectures. And now let me share my screen. And I appreciate that you are there at such a late time in the evening. In here, it's not so late. So for me, it's easier than for you. Okay, so I prepared the presentation and I will share now my screen. I just wondered what topic would be good for you, for students in media and communication who are interested, I guess, in the events of the contemporary world. And I thought that maybe we should think a little bit about popular culture as a form of our coping mechanisms with all kinds of crises. And I'm sure that you had a very hard time during the pandemics. I have seen in the news that it was for India particularly a very difficult period. And I'm sure that you are aware that now we in Hungary are neighboring a country where a war started recently, a couple of years back. So I thought just take a look to the role that popular culture can take in coping with those kinds of crises. I have to share with you that I never imagined in my life that I will have an adulthood when we'll have a pandemic, we'll have a war situation. And however, those events arrived, and I just realized that popular culture actually helped me a lot to go through those difficult times, and it's still helping. And I thought that I will give you a very general introduction to the research topic of popular culture, and I will try to show to you many research possibilities in this field. So if you want something very particular, maybe this lecture won't be something which could fulfill such an expectation, but I focused on the fact to give to you a general presentation on popular culture. I know that in the research of communication studies, it's not always a very common topic. And I think that it's very important to look to issues of popular culture, because we can see that our identities, our societies are largely shaped by issues of popular culture. Okay, so, okay. And my first slide is contains a meme practically. And I think that you have seen that news that Netflix has shut down its services in Russia right after the beginning of the war. And I think that this as news denotes a very important problem, that issues which are connected to popular culture nowadays, at the beginning of the 21st century, can have very important political consequences. So you can see that we have a war in Russia, and Netflix, a company which is based in the United States, as interested in entertaining people and circulates a lot of content linked to popular culture, just decides to express its political attitude by shutting down its services in a country which is no more considered as a place where Netflix can be safely aired. So this is one of my memes, and the other one, we have two memes on this slide. One of them, I think it's very familiar to you. So on the 68th day of the quarantine, a lot of images circulated in popular culture that congratulations, you've completed the whole Netflix. I think that all of us who have an account on Netflix, we just realized that it's impossible to complete the whole Netflix because we have a lot of content on Netflix. However, there is something about this meme which for me is very important, that many people who faced their first pandemic experience, and in Europe it was so. I know that in other parts of the world it wasn't the first pandemic in the 21st century, but in Europe it was the first one. They just coped with that new situation by going to their consumer practices and by watching Netflix practically during the whole day. And like this, Netflix just entered people's life during a situation of very serious crisis. Okay, and you can see on the other meme that the Netflix asked us if we wanted to watch Outbreak or Pandemic. So it's like a joke which regards that fact that our realities are shaped by our choices on Netflix. So my two examples in here just proves the same idea, that we are living in a culture where political events, economic events are hardly shaped by popular culture. And my question is the following: during the whole session, how popular culture became a coping mechanism with political and humanitarian crises. So that's our reality now. And I have three answers to this question, and I will develop during my presentation those three. The first one, because production nowadays in popular culture is very much reality oriented. So not today, the production of popular culture is not oriented towards a consumer practice interested in escapism, but it's directed to a consumer practice which want to know much more about reality. And you can see that one of the most successful movies during January 2021 on 22, we are in 22, yeah, in January this year on Netflix was the movie called Just Look Up, a movie directed by Adam McKay. And it's a movie which is so deeply rooted in contemporary events that even now, when we are thinking about maybe a third world war coming, I can see that the same patterns which were expressed in that movie are present in our everyday lives. My second answer to the question is because fictional content represents reality and teaches us knowledge.
Anna ma'am, you are muted by mistake, I think. Ma'am, please unmute yourself. Ma'am, please unmute yourself. I think you got muted. Try and unmute yourself.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, ma'am, now.
Okay, I just received a message that the host has muted you and maybe it was something, I don't know, but we are fine now. So now I have to reshare my presentation, I think. Now, please give me a feedback if you are able to see the slide. Okay.
Yes, we can see slides. Yeah.
Okay. So my second answer to that question, how popular culture became a form of coping mechanism with crisis, is that the fictional content is very reality oriented nowadays. And my third form of answer is that the new consumption patterns of the global audience all over the world are very much directed to a need to understand reality. Reality just became so confusing nowadays that we are appealing to popular culture to make us understand the world around us. And that's why producers want to give us something which interprets reality, and we want to watch something which helps us understand reality. Okay, and now let's see a little bit how, first of all, science started to understand the issues of popular culture. And at the beginning, as Svati said, popular culture is something which is a form of culture which is not a legitimate form of culture. So it's not the state or any other crucial institution or industry which legitimates popular culture. Popular culture is just a form of a culture invented by the masses, and I should add that, and invented for the masses. Because at a point when professionals in producing popular content discovered how successful some cultural forms are amongst the working class, they started to imitate somehow the particularities of those cultural contents, and they started to produce popular culture for the masses. So first of all, there were the masses who invented popular culture, and afterwards their forms of culture were copied, and today we have that mixture of professionally produced popular culture and really popular culture. So the popular culture produced by professionals and by the masses. And the first concept which wanted to understand the problems of popular culture was the concept of cultural industry. A cultural industry, and you can see that in this case, cultural industry, it's a form of culture which was discussed by theoreticians of the Frankfurt School in the 30s. Those scientists were all Europeans, and they were Europeans who emigrated during the Second World War from Europe to the United States. And for them, the popular cultural realities of the United States were very different from what they have seen in Europe, and they somehow wanted to make sense of those new forms of culture. You can see 4 names on this slide, the names of Max Horkheimer, of Adorno, of Habermas, and Walter Benjamin. They are the most important figures of the Frankfurt School and the first theoreticians of popular culture. And basically what did they say is that popular culture failed its ambitions during the second half of the 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th century, because popular culture just standardized popular culture, and it produced some forms of popular culture which are very similar in different cultures. And Swati already said at the beginning that one of the main ambitions of popular culture is to give a critical interpretation of mass culture. And in here, it's exactly this attitude that for those protagonists of the Frankfurt School, the homogeneous culture produced in America was too standardized, was not individualistic enough. And they considered that a very serious commodity fetishism went along with the invention of popular culture in the United States in the second half of the 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th century. But the end of the 20th century arrived, and such critical and somehow, let's say, naive point of view on popular culture as the one expressed by the authors of the Frankfurt School just went out of fashion. Things started to move in a very different direction. The production of popular culture wasn't anymore in accordance with issues of popular culture at the beginning of the 20th century, and the new generation of scholars wanted to understand issues of popular culture. And a name that I want to highlight very much in this presentation is the name of a British sociologist whose name is David Hesmondhalgh. And David Hesmondhalgh has a book which had several reprints till now, and this book is called The Cultural Industries. So you can see that the cultural industry, our word previously mentioned, now it changed, and it's a plural already. So we have several cultural industries, not only one. And David Hesmondhalgh says that we have to take into consideration that in contemporary societies, we have several cultural industries which have practically the same functioning mechanisms. And he considers that advertising, film and video, the art and antiques market, the publishing, the design, the software industry, the performing arts, the television and the radio system are working according to the same laws. And that's what Hesmondhalgh wants to understand. What are the laws which are common to all cultural industries? And he considers that between those cultural industries, we have two, which are some liminal examples. One of them is the example of the sports, and the other one is the example of fashion. Why those two are considered by David Hesmondhalgh liminal examples of creative industries? Because he says that sports and fashion are very much exposed to commercial considerations, and they are much more exposed to the necessities of a market logic than the other ones. So like advertising industry, the performing arts industry. And Hesmondhalgh says that practically all those cultural industries are interested in saying something about our realities. And in here I will give you two examples coming from a field that I'm very interested in, so from the field of television series. And one of those is a television series which was broadcasted during the second half of the 2010s. So it aired from 2015 to 2017, and it's a show called Mad Men. And in here you can observe that we have a play with words, because madman means that someone who has gone mad, so someone who has some mental problems. But at the same time, in Los Angeles and in New York, madman means a professional in advertising, and they are called madmen because the most famous advertising agencies in New York were all located on Madison Avenue, and from Madison Avenue we have a short term of mad. So the madmen in here are not some fool guys, they are just professionals in advertising. And I consider that Mad Men is a very interesting popular cultural object for us, because it shows how a product of popular culture, so a television series, can help us to understand how cultural industries actually work. So in Mad Men, we have a group of professionals in advertising, and practically the whole show is about their individual experiences and about their working methods. So practically we can understand by looking simply at the show how someone who is interested in advertising just is thinking the whole process of the content creation. And I think that's a very important feature of contemporary popular culture, that it just gives us insight on the everyday life of professionals in popular culture and in cultural industries. And my second example is a little bit similar to the first one. It's another television series called Vinyl, which was produced by HBO. HBO, amongst the streaming services, it's a streaming service with a very high level of quality. And Vinyl, it's a show about the popular music industry in the 80s. And again, we have the same idea. We have a cultural industry, the cultural industry of the popular music, and we can see people who are professional in this industry. And for me, a very important idea to take away from this show is that the show is not interested in the figure of the musician. It's interested in the figure of the producer of popular music. So the one who is behind the scenes, the one who has the knowledge on the most important issues of that field of popular culture. And practically those two contents coming from the field of television series, that show us that the ideas formulated by Hesmonthal in this book called Cultural Industry are very largely expressed nowadays in the content of popular culture itself. So Hesmonthal said that all cultural industries have one thing in common, and that one thing is that they are all symbol creator industries. So they are creating symbols about our everyday lives, and they help us understand the ideologies and the very problems of our contemporary societies. And the only issue which can be a difference between all those symbol creator industries is that amongst those cultural industries, we have cultural industries with a very high level of autonomy. And under this regard, if you're considering the popular culture produced by the music industry, you have a very high degree of autonomy, but you have other cultural industries which don't have such a high level of autonomy. And under this regard, you can think of maybe the production of television series in some countries. Like in here, the example of Russia is such a case that in Russia, television production is very largely governed by the state. And the main idea behind that concept of cultural industries is that they are all similar in that ambition that they want to create symbols for us to survive. And I said to you that I will answer to 3 questions during my presentation. And the first question is how producers started to make content which is very reality oriented. And in here, and now I will turn a little bit to the domain of the methodologies, we can turn our attention to the subfield of research in popular culture called the production studies. Production studies is a relatively new, I would say, domain of the research in popular culture, relatively new in the sense that in the last 20 years, we started to orientate our attention to the field of production studies. And the production studies wants to understand how the productional logics behind all kinds of popular industries changed during the last years. And one of the main affirmations of production studies is that all cultural industries today are practically working based on a cooperational logic. So they just have a lot of professionals coming from the field of visual content creation, coming from the field of special effects, coming from the field of sound design, etc., and they just make people cooperate. And that's a very new thing, because previously into the 21st century, cooperation wasn't such a very well-present logic in the production studies. The other affirmation coming from production studies is that popular culture became a very self-reflexive domain in the last years. And I think that the 2 examples that I have given to you previously are speaking about the same issue, that contemporary popular culture has a willingness to understand its own problems. Just to give you one example, we have on HBO another series called Westward, and Westward is an ongoing series, so we still are waiting for a 4th season for Westward. And Westward practically is a metaphor for the functioning of the entertainment industry. So today, if you want to conduct research on popular culture, you can just very easily watch some television series, some movies, and to take out some ideas on the functioning of popular culture, because it became a very self-reflexive domain of the content creation. Okay, and the other important issue in production studies is that the whole system of creation in creative industries is a very globalized one. So we can see nowadays Hollywood movies which are produced in Prague or in Hungary, or blockbuster movies for which the sound design or the special effects are produced in India. I know this fact because I have a dear PhD student who worked on several MCU productions from India. So that whole system became a very globalized system, and the content provision in popular culture today is worldwide content production. Okay, and now let's see a couple of methods which can help us answer to this question, how today popular culture is produced in such an order to help us cope with contemporary crisis. And one of the first methods which we can use in the field of research of popular culture is the field research. And under this regard, we can have expert interviews, and that's a very common method in the research of production studies, the expert interviews. I conducted some research interviews with producers of HBO in Europe, just to give you an idea. So maybe for you, Europe can have many specific cultures, but in my view, when I visited India, I just realized that Europe is somehow very similar to what cultural promiscuity you do have in India, because we have many small countries, but at the same time we have a very unique idea on our European identity, and it's a little bit the same for you, that someone coming from Kolkata and someone coming from Bombay, you do share the same Indian identity, but at the same time it's something completely different and culturally very diverse. So for me, those expert interviews, what we did with producers coming from HBO, just highlighted for me the idea that a producer who comes from Great Britain can have on issues coming from Eastern Europe. And for me, it's a very interesting issue how they just combine their attitudes, cultural attitudes, in producing certain shows. And the cooperation between many nations in Europe, it's a very frequent thing in popular culture nowadays. Another method that you can adopt is the participant observation. So you can just go to some popular cultural institutes and production sites and film producing companies, and just watch them, how they are working, how their everyday life is organized, what are their core values, and you can have different methods to carry out participant observation. But one of the methods that I would say that I utilized most is the media representation theory. And my two examples that I have given to you previously, the example concerning vinyl and the other concerning Mad Men, are for me case studies in media representation. So the media representation theory says that practically when you're watching content of popular culture, you're watching the view on the world of the person who created that particular media content, popular cultural content. So it's always about the people who produced the shows. And if you are very interested in the reality structures of a given popular cultural content, you can just very easily imagine what's in the head of those persons who produced the popular cultural contents. So this is the third method under this regard. And in here, I just wanted to give you a very famous example from the global popular culture from the 90s. It was the most successful sitcom of the 90s, the Seinfeld series. And in this series, you could see how someone, a stand-up comedian from New York, just imagined how the world works, how global issues are present in the world. And it was, this show Seinfeld was at the same time about the very limited cultural knowledge of a stand-up comedian in New York, but in the same time about the fact that he's conscious of his limited cultural knowledge. And I think that it's a very important topic in popular culture. How can we become global? How can we reflect on our own cultural preferences? Another example, and that's a very classical one, it's the first movie ever produced in Hollywood on issues of the Hollywood filmmaking. So it's a very self-reflexive movie. It's a movie called Sunset Boulevard, and it was produced in the 50s. I just wanted to highlight the idea that this self-reflexive tendency in popular culture is a very, very ancient one. Okay, and for this second part of my presentation, I want to turn my attention towards the semiotic aspects and the content related aspects of popular culture. I just said that my second question will be how the products of popular culture are reflecting current affairs. And in here, if we are interested in the content of popular culture, we could have four main methods. that we can utilize. The first one is a very largely put one, so very a general one, the qualitative document analysis. The qualitative document analysis means that we are just picking some examples of popular cultural products, and we just orientate our attention to those products of the popular culture. And qualitative analysis means that we are interested by the significance of every metaphor or of every visual effect, and we want to understand their place in the whole popular cultural document. The other research method, and this one is a very interesting one, and in Europe, I would say that we are not very fan of this one. However, I think that it's a very useful one, is the visual content analysis. When you want to conduct a visual content analysis, you have to keep in mind that you need big data. Big data and big data in visual culture is somehow very hard to process. So you need to have many television series or many movies or many news programs coming from different television programs. And if you have a large number of popular cultural products, you can conduct something as a visual content analysis. What you have to do is to have a coding logic and to define very well and very clearly the problems which interest you, and you will just carry out an analysis which will take out the same issues from those many examples that you want to analyze. Nowadays, visual content analysis is very much conducted by a computer-mediated research methodology, and you can have various programs which will help you to conduct the visual content analysis. And we have two other research methods in here when we direct our attention to the content of popular cultural creations. One of those is visual semiotics. That's a classic, I would say. Visual semiotic is interested in the symbol creator logic of a particular media content. So it's very closely linked to the qualitative document analysis, but in this case, we are interested in understanding the semiotic structure of a given popular cultural document. And the last one is the visual discourse analysis. The visual discourse analysis is still a qualitative document analysis, but in this case, we are not interested in the semiotics or in the visual effects of a given popular cultural document, but we are interested in the main ideas and the main ideologies that the popular cultural content is circulating, and we want to highlight those ideologies behind particular popular cultural content. And in here I will give you let's say two ways of approach to popular cultural contents. One of those is one invented by a researcher coming from Australia. Her name is Angela Dalianis, and she says that practically in contemporary popular culture and entertainment businesses, we have something what she calls neo-baroque spectacle. So something which visually is very rich, visually is very well developed, and those are shows which are constructed in a way to enchant all our senses. So from if you are going to an IMAX movie, you can see that all your senses are integrated into the entertainment experience. And that's what Angela Dalianis wants to understand, how those neo-baroque spectacles of the contemporary world are fabricated. I don't know if you have seen the blockbuster of this summer, The Dune. I think that in this case, the neo-baroque spectacle is very visible, that it operates with very large panoramas, and it it affects all our senses. Even if maybe the olfactive sense is not there, but you have that feeling that you almost can smell the dune, the visual, it's so hardly constructed in those cases. Okay, and Angela Daliani says that the whole postmodern culture is organized around those neo-Baroque spectacles. And I just added, there's some other names of researchers who were implied in those popular cultural methodologies, but I won't have now the time to develop more on this. I just put on a slide the covers of her books. I will send you my handout and you can dig deeper in the work of Angela Dalianis. And in here I put 5 key concepts of this particular form of content creation. So the multisensory visual effects. We saw how multisensory visual effects are working in contemporary popular culture with the example of Dune. Afterwards, another very important concept is that we need universe-like construction. So we need to fake a universe, another world which is similar to ours. That's something which motivates contemporary viewers. The other thing that we do need and still do need a very good storytelling. I know that it's like a catchphrase, and the buzzword, the word of storytelling, but still contemporary popular culture is very much oriented to storytelling strategies. And I just want to give you one example, and one example which is not coming from the field of visual production, but it's coming from the field of audio content creation, that nowadays we have a lot of podcasts which are designed according to logics of storytelling. So even the non-visual medium are very largely constructed according to the laws of storytelling. The other concept is the 360-degree marketing. So this one refers to the merchandising effects of contemporary popular culture. When we want to merchandise a product and we want to merchandise it worldwide, then we have to think to this 360-degree marketing. So it means that we have to produce objects, we have to produce memes, we have to produce media campaign, we have to think of all our senses and to produce merchandise content to all of those senses. And the last concept is the concept of transmedia storytelling. So the contemporary popular cultural products are designed to be compatible with many media universes. So you can have a book which is marketed like a bestseller, and afterwards the book is turned into a television series, is turned into a movie, is turned into some clothing maybe which were produced to present the movie in question. And that's the transmedia storytelling, that we have multimodal universes in contemporary popular culture. And one example to highlight to you how the qualitative document analysis is working nowadays. And in here, I want to give you a concept, and this concept will highlight how qualitative document analysis can work in contemporary popular culture. In the second half of the 10th, so in 2010s, after 2015, a scholar called Jason Mittel started to use the term of complex TV. And what does the term of complex TV mean? It means that in the 2010s, television started to become to produce serial content, which is very much qualitative driven content, not quantitative driven content. And I am sure that you're thinking now to the fact that in the 2010s, the streaming services started already to be worldwide broadcasted. And indeed, that's the case why television became very quality driven in the 2010s, because there was a huge demand for quality content all over the world. And Jason Mitchell said that complex television just invented new narrative techniques and patterns for the hybridized televisual content which were present on streaming services. And he considers that the reasons for this complexity are the following: that we have complexity on the level of the content, we have complexity on the level of the culture which consumes the given televisual content, and thirdly, on the level of the context. So those consumption societies where the televisual productions are there and are watched. And under this regard, he says that we have a reader-oriented poetics coming from the producers of the TV series. Afterwards, we have a cognitive poetics coming from the producers of television series. And thirdly, we have a historical poetics, because television series produced in the 2010s were very much conscious about their antecedents. So what was the history of televisual production and how television series were made previously. And that historical poetic of television series just highlights why today we have so many televisual series which are nostalgic or which want to reproduce a culture coming from the 80s or the 90s. You can think of a very successful series, The Stranger Things, which is a very good example for this strategy. And that complex TV, if we are taking it in a historical perspective, just started to come to life in the 70s, and with the arrival of HBO in the United States. And practically the researchers in the history of television as media consider that the real cultural revolution of the streaming services wasn't produced by Netflix, it was produced by HBO in the 70s. Here you can see the books of Jason Mitchell and the impact of the televisual content creation on popular culture in America. And for me, the book of Jason Mitchell is very important because it shows how television series became the dominant cultural form of the 2010s and of today. So I would say that today, besides popular music, the other dominant form of popular culture are the serial contents and television series. Okay, and now I will just explain two main concepts in complex television, the difference between series and serial. So serial is a form of complex television, where a television series tells you a single complex story with multiple characters. And the series is another form of televisual content creation, where in each episode we have a different story, but we have the same protagonist coming back from episode to episode. You will have a more detailed definition on the next slides. Now I won't develop those differences. And here I gave you these two examples. The Delhi Crime, which was one of my favorite Indian shows. It's content which has a very serial way of constructing story. So you have the same problem which is developed during the first episode, and after this issue is solved during the whole series. And is a crime fiction series. And the other one is the Euphoria, which was the biggest success in the streaming world in the last weeks. So the last episodes of Euphoria aired two Mondays back. and it was watched by 19 million people all over the world, and it's a huge success given the contemporary, very nichified structure of streaming services. And in this case, we have an example of a serial production, because in this case, we had a different storyline for each episode. So for Delhi Crime, we had the same storyline for the whole show, and in here, we had a different storyline for each episode in question. So that's the difference between series and serial. And another issue that I wanted to introduce here is the issue of anthology series. In contemporary serial production, the idea of an anthology became very important. And the idea of anthology means that we have a showrunner, and the showrunner is like a guarantee for us that we'll have a very good show. So for televisual cultural production, the authorship that we had for previous cultural industries just moved from the director and the producer to the showrunner. So the one who invented the idea of the show. And I think that it's a very important way of rethinking popular culture according to this idea of a cultural, let's say, curator who just curates content for you, and he is not the actual originator of the idea. He's the content curator, and his views are affecting the production of the series. In here, just one example to this anthology series tendency, the True Detective, but you can think of series like the Black Mirror, and the very old one, the first anthology series ever produced was the anthology series produced in the 50s by Alfred Hitchcock. And that's the oldest example for this one. In here, if you want to understand more those processes of qualitative content making, you can take into the consideration the productional point of view, how the different streaming services are producing content in different countries of the world. And if you understand those differences, you will have a much how to say, a much more qualitative driven understanding of the works of popular culture. And the other very important issue to be considered is the difference between national and local traditions, and how national and local traditions can be integrated in the global logics of cultural industries. I gave in here some examples, but I want to finish in time, so I will leave you afterwards to go through my slides and to discover some Easter eggs in on those ones. Okay, and content wise, I will have one last quote coming from a researcher, and this quote will highlight a little bit the idea of transmedia storytelling. And in here, I would quote a very classic work in the research of popular culture, the work of Henry Jenkins, who is a very respected scholar in the field of popular culture. He's someone who works at the UCLA, so the Media Institute of Los Angeles. I think I have a question. Maybe Swati, you can help me with.
Ma'am, no, we were only asking the participants that if they have any questions, they can type out in the chat box. So
okay.
we just ask them to do so.
Okay, fine. Then I see if we have question at the end.
Whenever we have a question, ma'am, we let you know. I'll inform you.
Okay, thank you so much. And Henry Jenkins considers that transmedia storytelling has 7 principles, and those 7 are the principles that I put on my slide. So the first one, that something which will become a very successful popular cultural product has the potential to be spread. So it has some common knowledge which makes it very easily adaptable in different cultural contexts. The other thing is that it has the possibility to be continued. So it's a serial logic behind it, and it can be multiplicated. So just to give an idea on this idea of multiplicity, if you are looking to the sitcom format, in the sitcom format, usually you have 4 protagonists. And you can see that the whole sitcom making industry of the United States just produced a lot of series where we have 4 protagonists, and those 4 protagonists are different in the whole shows, but we never thought of changing the dynamics of 4 people speaking to each other. So that's the multiplicity. You can maybe just place a sitcom in Afro-American world and to change the character, but you will still respect the format, and that's the idea of the multiplicity. The other thing is that you need to have an immersive universe where you have Easter eggs, you have a lot of possibilities to change between storylines, and you need to have that illusion that you are in an actual world. The other thing is the world building tendency of the transmedia storytelling. World building means that you have a hierarchy which is very particular to that universe in question. Afterwards, you have a serial logic. And the 2 last principles are referring to the fact how we as consumers can relate to the given media universe. So it's a very subjective feature. You are recreating your own identity through the works of popular culture. And the last one is the performative aspect of transmedia storytelling. And the social media is all about performativity. You can have examples coming from popular culture, and you can reenact on social media all those elements. So the whole TikTok phenomenon is practically the proof that transmedia storytelling has a very performative thing. Okay, and my last idea, how viewers are referring to the contents produced by popular culture. In here we have a very classic typology of viewers in popular culture. We have the restrained users, so the ones who want to hold back a little bit their enthusiasm. There are the eruptive persons, so the one who are very expansively living their experience. The anticipatory ones, you know, that annoying friend of yours who says all the time that I know that he will be the killer, and it's all the time focused on what will come next and wants to spoil somehow the present of the consumption. And the last one is the reactive type, so the one who wants to share his ideas, and the whole phenomenon of Reddit and Twitter and how we are expressing our ideas are there.
And sorry to interrupt, there's a question from the participants. Pradeep sir, he asks that what is the influence of prevalent power structure and power distribution on production type? Do you find any distinction in this regards between European and American traditions?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a very important question. I think I had one slide which partially reflects this issue. Those are very different productional logics, and when you can read about such debates that are we allowed to screen Netflix-made movies at the Film Festival of Cannes in France, you are just face to face with this issue. And I think that the arrival of streaming services did a lot to somehow spoil those differences. And now I think that popular cultural production in Europe became much more similar to the American one and even to the Indian one that in previous years. And maybe amongst my European colleagues, I'm someone who is very pro streaming services, but I consider that that's a very good thing, that somehow we learn the working mechanisms of popular culture in America and in India. So I'm optimistic about this. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's my opinion on this.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, ma'am, sure, definitely.
Okay.
You have answered.
Can I then go on with my presentation? It's almost the final
Okay,
part.
sure, ma'am, sure, yeah, please.
Okay, so because you told me that I should focus on methods, I just put together like a short summary to the methodologies which were conducted towards the audiences of popular culture. And here we have a very large concept of reception studies. You can have all kinds of researches under this very generic concept. The reception studies means that we are interested in how communities are paying attention to work in popular culture. But reception studies have many reverberations and many branches. One of these is audience analysis. And audience analysis can differ from case to case. Those are, we have researches where we are interested in the audience expectations about the media product. And when we are interested in the audience's expectations, we just say that we want to produce something which is in accordance with those expectations. So somehow I'm not so much interested in the creativity of a showrunner, but we are interested in the expectations of the audience. And afterwards, we can have audience analysis on a very simple level when we just want to know what part of an audience has knowledge on the media product which interests us. So, for example, a TV series is watched amongst, I don't know, 30% of Bangladesh population. That's a very simple way to conduct audience studies when I just want to see the visibility of a given popular cultural product. And we have another thing, not the expectations of the audience, but we can be interested in the audience attitude or the approach towards the social media product. So the attitude means, do they have positive attitudes towards my media content? For example, the Euphoria show that I presented to you earlier, it's a show which is very interesting under this regard, because Euphoria is a very watched show and it's a very popular one, but it has a very, let's say, concerned reception, because it deals with issues of drug consumption and how hard it is today to be an adolescent, a teenager. And many of the show's viewers says that, oh, it's too hard to watch Euphoria. We have some pleasure in watching it, but still we consider that it's something which is problematic. So their attitude is a very mixed one, and the mixed attitude is not necessarily a problem with the contents of popular culture. And the last aspect of the reception studies is what is the potential size of the audience. For example, for us in Eastern Europe, that's a constant problem, because we have a very small Hungarian population, or we have a very small Bulgarian population, a very small Slovakian population. And when you're thinking in terms of national content making, it's always a problem that you cannot achieve multi-million viewers because you don't have that amount of masses. And I'm sure that this is a problem which for you is practically a non-existing problem, because the Bollywood film industry and the Indian content making always has that potential to reach a big audience. But there are other kinds of problems. What are the abilities of the audience to watch and to come in contact with the popular cultural phenomenon which interests us? And under this regard, we can address the issues of differences in digital literacy, in visual literacy between audiences in Europe, and just simply access to technology and access to internet and access to all those media which are there to promote contents in popular culture. So this was my last slide. Thank you for your attention. You have there my address, and I think I just respected the 1 hour time frame. I will leave the screen sharing option, but I will stay with you to the Q&A session.
Okay. So, ma'am, we have one question from a colleague, Nitesh Tripathi. He is saying that, just a moment, ma'am. Yeah. In dialectic of enlightenment, is it suggested that culture industry is a better term than mass culture, as it doesn't represent the masses? If that is the case, then can we consider TikTok shorts and all these forms as a form of mass culture?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the understanding of the concept, it worked very well. Yeah, in dialectic of enlightenment, they suggest that culture industry is better than mass culture because they focus on the industrial logics behind the production of popular culture. So who are the professionals who are able to produce culture? What are the technologies which help us to produce culture? So on the one hand, the cultural industry doesn't represent the masses, but on the other hand, we need to understand the industrial logics behind the territory. And yes, the TikTok shorts and memes, yes, they are definitely a form of mass culture, because there you have a technology, but technology enables just a very small part of the content creation, and afterwards you can have many very personal and very individual ideas, and that's why it can be considered a form of mass culture. Yeah.
And ma'am, he also says that, are they, exerting dominance or influence on everyone? That is what he's trying to ask.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because they're only created by a few people. So.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the case that we are facing right now. Yeah, it's a dominance, it's hegemony, and I think, and that's why streaming services are so important to me, that I think that streaming services enabled the first platforms which can work against hegemony. We know that they have a lot of problems, that even streaming services are very homogeneous, and we need to deal with hegemony in their cases too. But still, compared to the fact that we have one a studio system in the United States, and we have one other strong studio system in Nigeria, and another one in India, from here to the fact that each country has the possibility to articulate somehow its ideas in audiovisual content creation, I think it's a very huge step forward, and a step for heterogeneity.
Okay, ma'am, so there's just one more question from the participants. How can we do comparative study in popular culture, as culture is all about how one perceives one's milieu? Can it be objective in nature? So this is what Moholy-Nagy ma'am asks.
Yeah, I can see now the questions, because now I've seen the question. Yeah, it's a very, very good question. So I will begin, I think, with the last element of the question, because it's the easiest one to be addressed. That no, it's not an objective field. It will never be. We try to be objective, but I would say that objectivity in this field means that you have to have the ambition to be complex. So to understand all the stakeholders. That's why I focused in my presentation on the three main stakeholders in the production and consumption of popular culture. So the producers, the consumers, and the whole technological systems which connect those two parties. So complexity maybe can save us from subjectivity. We cannot be objective, but we should have the ambition to be complex. And the other question was, how can we do comparative study in popular culture? That's a tough one. So I think I just wanted to, during my whole life, to achieve something which is measurable under this regard. And I was included in several research projects where researchers coming from different countries of Europe and even from the United States try to understand phenomena of popular culture. And I always realized that maybe we could come up with some scientific method which will make comparable the different countries, but all the time the scholars will be there and we'll have our boundaries, our different ways of thinking, and it's very hard to construct a common ground for the research, the comparative research to be conducted. And that's always the trickiest part. How can we agree with a researcher coming from Denmark and the researcher coming from Russia that the same issues are the important issues? And I think that if I'm an optimistic person, and I think that there is room for real comparative perspective in the research of popular culture, I think that these issues need to be addressed by a tolerance amongst the ideas of the other, and that's the first thing to do. And afterwards, we can come up with very clever methods and everything, but that's the basis. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so ma'am, that brings us to the end of the session, and I would like to thank you for this enriching session. And you've been discussing about the popular culture at length and how it is important in shaping the cultural identity of the mass. Also, you told us about popular audiovisual content and popular music. You discussed about the symbol creator industry, socio-cultural determination, and how there's a domination in these industries which exist. You have discussed about many methods of doing research like qualitative document analysis, visual content analysis, discourse analysis. You told us about transmedia storytelling. So the last 1 hour has been, truly enlightening for all of us. And ma'am, we really want to thank you for taking time out from your busy schedule and coming and, educating us about all these concepts. It was really wonderful to listen to you. And in future, we look forward to, get more knowledge from you in more sessions.
Yeah, so, I hope that will continue. And thank you so much for having me. Have a nice event in continuing. And
thanks, Anna.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Anna. Take care. Thank you.
Bye, Anna. Take care. It's wonderful.
Thank you, Anna.
Should I leave now or sorry, I can't hear you now. You're muted.
Sorry. Actually, ma'am, we have another session now. Another speaker is there. Okay. So, ma'am, it's upon you. Like, if you.
Okay. Bye. Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. So, thank you everyone for listening to Anna ma'am, who had a brilliant session. Now, this session, the next session, will be conducted by Professor Dr.
Swati, you have gone on mute mode.
So sorry. So this session will be conducted by Professor Dr. Padma Rani, a renowned researcher who will share her thoughts on political communication. So first, let me share some insights with you. Political communication is a dynamic area of research and is fundamental in determining the popularity of a candidate among the electorate. The electorate ascertains the victor by analyzing their verbal and non-verbal communication, which is delivered by the candidate during the campaigning. It is that interactive process that concerns the transmission of information among politicians, the news media, and the public. Public opinion is also very important for politicians to know. The political communication strategy thus formulated in the elections might lead to the success or conquest of the political party. In short, political communication means the system of producing, distributing, processing, and exchanging information that has the capability to influence the realization of the political authority. We have Dr. Padma Rani ma'am with us to enlighten us more about the process of political communication. Dr. Padma Rani is a renowned academician and professor and director of Manipal Institute of Communication. She has earlier worked as the head of the department at MOP Vaishnav College for Women, Chennai. She is currently the managing editor for the Global Media Journal edition, a UGC Care listed journal. She is the coordinator of the Media Research Center, Manipal Academy of Higher Education. She has undertaken research projects for the United Nations Population Fund, which is also known as the UNFPA, and the National Commission for Women, Government of India. She has been a part of faculty exchange program to the University of Applied Sciences, Germany on a DAAD scholarship and visiting international professor at George Simon Ohm Technical University, Germany. She has presented research papers in various international and national conferences like International Association for Media and Communication Research, Association for Education in Journalism and Mass Communication, the Asian Media Information and Communication Center, and many others. Her areas of interest are gender, new media, and media policy. She has been awarded by the Global Media Education Council for her stellar contribution to the field of media education recently, an Exceptional Leader of Excellence Award by Global Digital Annual Women Economic Forum. Her latest research is published in the form of a book titled Pandemic News Patterns, the First 6 Months in Kerala. I welcome you, ma'am, to the Faculty Development Program of the School of Media and Communication, Adamas University. Ma'am, we're elated to have you with us today and very eager to listen to you. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you for that elaborate introduction. Very elated by it. Can you see me and hear me?
Sure, ma'am. Yeah, we can see you. Yeah.
Okay. Will you be sharing my PPT or should I share it?
Ma'am, we will share it. Just give us a moment to share it.
Yeah, so, before I begin, I would, just like to start off by saying that political communication is a hybrid field which combines a lot of other social sciences and communication together. In the arena of politics, it has already, a small introduction to it has already been given. But, what I am going to do today for you is first take you through how this discipline originated. Because once you understand the origin of the discipline, how it emerged as political communication, that is when we would see that how it is an amalgamation from various disciplines, and then talk about the research methods, which are primarily, I'm not talking of all the research methods, but some of the main research methods that has been used in this discipline till now. And also, there are a lot of material available. In fact, there's an encyclopedia itself on research methods in political communication. So I would, request all of you who are interested in it to read it for yourself rather than me putting everything together here. But I would give you a brief idea, but take you from the evolution of the discipline to the methods. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, so broadly, what is political communication? In the broadest sense, it refers to communicative practices of all kinds of political organizations in both domestic and international arena. In fact, Dentod and Woodward define that it is any kind of a communication which has a purposeful communication about politics. But when you look at the elements of political communication, the next slide. Yeah, when you look at the elements of political communication, you realize that it is, there are three main actors here in the political communication process: the political organizations, the media, and the citizens. And it is not a one-way flow. It's a two-way flow of communication. And I would say not only a two-way, it's a multimodal flow of communication that happens between these three main actors who are involved in the process of communication, which is about politics. Yeah, moving on to the next slide. How did this discipline actually evolve? As a discipline, political communication was shaped by the real world concerns of the effects of the World War I and Nazi propaganda, and by the hopes and fears and forecast about the effects of new media at that point of time. I'm talking of 1930s and 40s, when radio and television were new media, not the new media that we think of today. And the findings of the earlier researchers like Burleson and Lazarfield. Lazarfield was one of the pioneers of this area of political communication. They were very peculiar to the media systems of the 40s, and many of their generalizations do not hold up today. Just as media structures have changed, media systems, the deliveries have changed. Also, the voting patterns, the behavior of the voters. Therefore, the structure of communication which shapes the politics, both because of the political activity consists of communication, and because constraints on communication limits the exercise of power. Now, currently, almost every political party, every political candidate, not only political actors, but also non-political actors, and I would talk about it later, also at every level, from the local level to the highest level of the prime minister, or in some countries from the president to the local level, depending on the kind of political systems they have an active website and an active social media presence, and also a team working for them on their social media. Now, given this background from, the World War I and Nazi propaganda to the evolution of the social media and social media networks that we have today, is what, is how the scope of the subject has expanded. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. Now, one of the, the discipline, one of the founders of the discipline, Harold Laswell, when he talked about political science and communication, he reveals about how much has changed since he has probed propaganda techniques, language, and the content analysis method of unpacking, both in the 30s and 40s, whereas, in the study of politics, it was the concern about who gets what, when, and how. Whereas in communication, it was who says what, to whom, and with what effect. Now, this classical distributional definition of politics was very unidirectional. It was a linear model of communication together, which, will lead us to define political communication as the study of who gets what, when, and how by saying what, in which channel, with what effect. And this is something that Harold Laswell, who's one of the founders of this discipline, talked about. Now, why am I talking about the origin of the discipline is also because this gives authenticity to, the area of political communication as a separate discipline as it has grown over the years. Yeah, next slide. When you look at the pages of the American Political Science Association, the International Communication Association, the National Communication Association of America, a lot of political communication studies initially happened in America. And that's how you will find that, even in my study, I'm focusing a lot on the American studies because that is where it originated from. All of them, if you look at it, all these emphasize on both domestic and international, both on individual and group communication. And look at the last one. It talks about advocacy groups and social movements also. Yeah. So slowly from what Laswell said, the scope of the subject from individual communication to group communication to advocacy and social movements kept expanding. Next one. Drawing on these traditions, some scholars today define political communication as making sense of symbolic exchanges about the shared exercise of power and the presentation and interpretation of information, messages, or signals with potential consequences for the exercise of shared power. I'm sorry for the missing R here. And therefore, it's a creation of a hybrid field. Next slide. Yeah. And therefore, this is a creation of a hybrid field where political communication has shared interests with, a lot of questions such as under what circumstances, if so, how, who are the voters, who are the leaders, and how the political system is affected by the media, how, if at all, does the rhetoric matter in the addresses, how do exchange between individuals happen, and all this, if you look at it, has been institutionalized over a period of time. And it's also cross-disciplinary because if you look at the earlier work of Cross about the Great Debate, which he published in 1962, which brought together scholars in sociology, rhetoric and public address, mass communication and political science, but also targeted scholars in one discipline into a journal hosted by other disciplines. You had Tom Patterson's essay on television advertising and news, television news and political advertising, which was published in Communication Research in 1974, You had the Quarterly Journal of Speech, which published Lance Bennett's work, The Ritualistic and the Pragmatic Basis of Political Campaign Discourses, and a number of examples like that. Now, this common publishing avenues also, which were provided by, there were two journals at that time, the Public Opinion Quarterly and the Journal of Communication, which really promoted this kind of a work by providing avenues of scholars who did not belong to one field. They wrote on political communication, but they either came from sociology or psychology or communication. And these journals provided, and they were reputed journals, so they provided them the avenue to publish even before the ICA came up with, the Political Communication Journal, which is very much present now, which is, quite listed high in your Scopus and your Web of Science. And before the arrival of the Political Communication, it was known as Political Communication Review. And also a lot of funding, in order to establish a discipline, a lot of funding is also required, because that is when you can do large scale research. And, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, in fact, we all know that Laswell's studies were, funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. In fact, Laswell has also done a study on radio in India, which was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. Then you had Ford Foundations, which came in. And finally, a number of organizations today, funding organizations, are funding these kind of studies, and were funded at that point of time. Also, in fact, in US, as way back as 1952, a study was conducted on the presidential elections. And these were all funded studies, and that's how large-scale studies could be conducted, and generalizations drawn out, inferences drawn out for the discipline. And that emerged as an hybrid, and therefore, it has its, next slide. Like political economy, political psychology, political communication is a hybrid with complex and permeable boundaries and interests that overlap with those of related fields like political science, public opinion, rhetoric, neuroscience, also media psychology. And therefore, it is drawing and borrowing on from a range of social sciences and humanistic disciplines. In fact, the founders only kept themselves to sociology, psychology, political science, and communication. But today, you also have people who were working on agenda setting, priming, framing, and so many other things, who themselves do not describe as political communication theorists, but we as political people who are studying political communication consider them as the theorist. Please move ahead. And then two important changes which happened in the political arena also expanded the scope of this subject. One is the emergence of transnational and non-national actors on the political stage, like your ISI, all those kind of organizations, and the enhanced ability of individuals to convey messages to large-scale audiences. And this happened with the emergence of your social media and mobile technology. Now, these two changes have really, expanded the scope of political communication, also made it important that we as a discipline need to study these things also. Can we move ahead? Okay, so after all this, what is political communication? First, it is the making of, sense of symbolic exchanges about exercise of power, including but not necessarily requiring shared power. Second, political communication is the study of how, why, when, and with what effect humans make sense of symbolic exchanges about sharing and shared power. And third is political communication is the study of how humans claim, lose, or share power through symbolic exchanges, a process that includes creative collaboration and creative co-adaptation. And, one thing we need to understand that it is about power which is predicted from the top-down models of understanding. And especially, it also emphasizes on the process and focuses on how, political communication is talked about. Now, I move on. This was the background to political communication, but then now I move on to how the various contents in political communication evolved. Okay. And it's very important for us to understand this before we jump on to the methods directly. Walter Lippmann and the public opinion studies that he conducted. In fact, he's considered as one of the first scholars who did content analysis, and he did content analysis of the New York Times coverage of the 1917 Russian Revolution. And Lippmann and, Mars, M-E-R-Z-D, they found that and there was an anti-Bolshevik bias in the news coverage. Lippmann was also important to identify the role of mass media in public opinion formation in a democracy. He argued that media whose freedom was protected by the First Amendment were crucial in creating a free marketplace of ideas. The value of participatory democracy, active and widespread popular participation informed by a free and responsible press serves as an important impetus to political communication research. And, it was he who actually, started the kind of content analysis of news coverage of various political events in the newspaper. The second study that I've written here is Harold Loswell and the propaganda analysis. And it was in this study that the effect of media effects as part of an ongoing research program began at the University of Chicago. And he basically specialized in the investigation of propaganda. He analyzed the propaganda messages by the Germans versus the French, the British, and the Americans in World War I. Here also, Laswell has used the content analysis method and formalized the methodology for analyzing media messages. This is also your starting point from where the discipline also started getting its due. Now, the most famous study is of Paul Lazarsfeld and the Erie County studies. Lazarsfeld basically was a mathematician. Yeah, and he has made an important contribution to the tool maker of social science research on mass communication effects. In fact, Lazarsfeld led the radio research project funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, which explored the effect of radio on American audiences. He also, specialized in communication research, and with his sociological colleague, Robert K. Merton, he developed the research methods of focus group interview, which we all talk about today. Data gathering techniques were initially utilized to study, the US government radio spots urging the Americans public to plant victory gardens, collect scrap iron, and use rubber and buy war bonds. And there was kind of, propaganda which was done by the government here in America to draw scholars from various social sciences, including Lazarfield, Laswell, Scram, and all those others. And it was also, he was also part of that. Plus, what is the Erie County Studies? The Erie County Studies was the first quantitative study of voting behavior. Yeah, and this was done in 1940. And what was, found, how did he conduct this study? Lazarfield and his colleagues conducted 600 personal interviews for 6 months until the November of 1940 presidential elections. And what did he conclude? As they tried to investigate the direct effects of media in determining how people vote in a presidential election. Here, the main dependent variable was only voting behavior. And they found that, people had already made up their minds even before the campaign began. Only very few people changed their opinion because of the media exposure. But, they also felt that there has to be a two-step flow of communication in which opinion leaders with a high degree of media exposure then passed on political information to their people via interpersonal communication. And therefore, they found that, it was not alone media exposure, but also the interpersonal communication, which was important, which played an important role in individuals' political decision making. And this was explored much later. I will talk about that how media, public agenda, policy agendas got influenced by this Lazarfield study. Then came your Daniel and Duchesne's news event diffusion. And finally, the Maxwell, MCOM's and Donald Shaw's agenda setting process. All these scholars, why I've listed them out is these were people who actually managed or who actually worked towards setting up a discipline of political communication. In fact, by the time, these studies were done, political communication was taught in universities in US with graduate programs on it. The agenda setting, basically the growth of television in US in the 1960s led to this research on agenda setting process. And they were one of those, Combs and Shaw were one of those scholars who were actually influenced by reading a book on Cohen and by William Scram. And they collaborated and did this empirical study in Chapel Hill study. Yeah. And they interviewed about 100 undecided voters in Chapel Hill and helped them make their minds in the 1968 presidential election, which was, actually the first empirical investigation of the agenda setting process. And is the most, in fact, if you look at it, this is the most widely cited publication in the field of this research. And how did they do this? They did content analysis, the media coverage of the election in order to identify what were the 5 main issues, that and the amount of coverage that was given to these 5 main issues. And then they went to the voters. This they called it as the media agenda. Then they went to the voters and they had a personal interview survey with each of the voters and asked them that what were the issues that they considered. Now, the media agenda had 5 issues. They wanted them to also scale and say that, which issue do they think is important. And they compared the ranking of the media agenda versus the public agenda. That is what the people wanted, their leaders to talk about and things. And that is how emerged from their research a temporal sequence of that the media agenda feeds into the public agenda, and the public agenda will feed into the policy agenda. And framing, began to be studied as an important influence in the agenda setting debate a decade after the Chapel Hill study. In various studies, framing then began to be included after this study. Can I have the next slide? Yeah, now, framing was also studied by Shanto Iyengar when he did, an agenda setting study about the indirect effects of mass media and the minimal effects, further also about political communication research, which is a primary emphasis on individual political behavior by relating media coverage, news coverage to an issue of individual aggregated, responses or to issues and other political institutions. How do they respond to those things? Now, with the emergence of the new media technologies, you also had this diffusion of news events, which I talked about. And Dudson and Dallison, they did a study on that, about diffusion and Dallison, and also Roger and Seidel in 2002, they had investigated the study of, the coverage on television about the September 11 attack and on the World Trade Tower and Pentagon. And they found that the news of that event led to various actions by members of the public, such as donating blood, sending financial contributions. They were flying American flags on vehicles, home and at workplaces, and showing solidarity. And these events, such events also gained a lot of scope for studies in the political communication agenda. Now, one of the early studies of the use of new media technologies is your PEN study. PEN is basically Public Electronic Network. This was a project in Santa Monica in California. A PEN was basically designed to encourage communication exchanges, especially about political issues among the residents of that community. This was a 6-year investigation of PEN conducted by communication scholars at the University of South California. PEN was noteworthy because it was at this time in 1989 that the first municipal electronic network was set up, and the residents had to pay no cost to it. They initially that had a total population of 90,000, the city, but some 5,300 residents had signed up for this project. Those 60,000 people at that time had access to the PEN network. And only about 1,500 people remained with them till the end of the study. And some 200 electronic messages used to be exchanged monthly between the residents and city officials at that time. They content analyzed these messages exchanged on the PEN network in a community which was already politically active, and also found out that, most of the time, this new means of communication, that is the internet, the website, was not used for political purposes. It was only used wherever people were very politically active, in those cases, and especially among the Americans who played a very active role in electoral politics. And there were also other types of communication behavior. But this study also highlighted one thing we need to understand is that this study highlighted that how, the internet impacts the digital divide, the process, because it's advantageous for certain people and disadvantageous for certain others, because they are completely left out of the system. They have no access. In fact, they came up with a very interesting finding in Santa Monica, which was not part of this study, is that, since this PEN network was available in public libraries, a lot of homeless people would spend cold nights in the public library since it was open 24/7. And they used that PEN network to find jobs for themselves. In fact, one of them said that, by using the network, he couldn't help it could not prevent him from the cold, but it at least helped his brain be active. And they were able, so those were those were not the main findings, but they also pointed out these things in the study. Now, you have the Barack Obama's presidential campaign, which has been widely studied, and he was one of the pioneers in using politicians to use the social media for his campaign. In India, we have our own Prime Minister, who is a very active person on social media. And obviously, these have also been studied. It's not only that individuals, but also government using social media for various purposes, whether it's crisis communication or, building networks, informing people. All that has been widely studied now. Yeah. Can you just change the slide? Yeah. Now, against this background, I'm going to talk about some of the research methods. As you come from the discipline of communication, these research methods are not new to you. Even in political communication, the primary methods remain the same. That is the survey research, the content analysis, the network analysis, experimental methods. Only thing is, that today we have technology to help us in all these kinds of research. So survey research, as you've seen from the basic pioneering studies, and that's why I put those studies in the beginning, to see that most of them either used content analysis or survey research. And survey research became the primary method for data collection. And this was basically used to ascertain how and what various publics think about political issues in the wake of the political information that they have received. It turns, to the study of content, framing, and presentation of verbal messages. Survey basically is that, you ask people about standardized questions about certain things that they have heard at that particular point of time. And why did I put the survey research at the first is that, in the Encyclopedia of Political Communication and the Handbook of Political Communication, it points out that 48% of research in political communication is done through survey research. Today, we can use computers in survey research, whereas because, the computer assisted self administered interviews, you can read and respond to questionnaires on the computer. In fact, they are much more advantageous than the pencil and pen surveys that we are so used to doing pre-COVID. post-COVID, I think we've also, tried to adopt to Google Forms or SurveyMonkey, Qualtrics, all those kind of softwares which help us to collect survey data. And it's also that, it's not only advantages, because it helps you get questions easily to your, it's not very easy. You still need to pursue your volunteers. You need to get their consent before you send out the forms to them. But the thing is that if somebody hasn't filled your form completely, hasn't filled your question survey completely, you can immediately go back to them and persuade them. You can only persuade them or, request them to do it completely. Or if you feel that there's some kind of a mistake that has happened, it can be corrected immediately. Whereas when we did the pen and pencil survey, sometimes this was not possible. Only when we started, looking at our questionnaires, did we realize later that, oh, this, because you took a help of a lot of other people to collect the data. Now, respondents also today are willing to, supply sensitive information in this format, in the computer assisted format, because, they remain anonymous. We don't know who they are. And therefore, it is, you can do it in so many different ways, like not only collection of data, but also interviews can be done with the help of computers. That's what we are doing now. It's not interview, but then, I'm sitting here and so many of you are sitting in different other places and listening to it. And I'm sure that with the help of these Zoom and other kind of platforms, we can even conduct interviews and collect data. Yeah. And that also saves a lot of time and resources for people. Now, at the same time, it's not that everything has an plus point. There are certain disadvantages also with survey research. Now, before I go to the problems, there are two kinds of survey research where one can do. One is the cross-sectional survey, where you're collecting data from a sample of respondents at one point of time. Yeah. Whereas in panel surveys, we collect data from the same respondents at different points of time. Okay. Supposing I, want to understand, just an hypothetical example, that I would want to understand which, what kind of influence did, Narendra Modi have on the UP elections whose result is going to be announced. If I'm doing a cross-sectional study, at one point of time, I would just, ask all the people. But if I'm doing a panel, I would, do a study when the campaign is in the middle stages, when the campaign is in the beginning, and also at the end of the campaign. And that would help me, understand that how people have moved or what influence has happened on them as the campaign has progressed. But the major disadvantage with, a sample survey research is in the selection of the sample. Especially, when you're doing survey research, you don't know whether all your responses will be on the positive side because you've collected only from those people, or it'll always be it could be only on the negative side because you've met only those people who are, so these kind of things could actually go wrong. There are certain disadvantages of survey research, even though, with technology, yes, has made it easier for us to collect data, made it easier for us to go about it. But then there are certain disadvantages with it. And also, in the survey research, the whole idea of open-ended and closed-ended questions. Today, while we are using various software for analysis, most of the time you find that people would prefer closed-ended questions. But the disadvantage to a closed-ended question is you only give them options of what you've drawn from literature or what as a researcher you think would be relevant. Yeah. But then, the person answering the survey need not believe in all those options. So what happens is sometimes, the closed ended questions, we are not able to capture the right thoughts or the right opinion of people. But when we have an open-ended question, then you're more likely to capture respondents' thoughts, especially when they are allowed to express their ideas. But this is also, the accuracy is also at the cost of time needed for conducting these kind of surveys of open-ended questions, coding them, and then coding them into various categories and analyzing them. Even though today we have various softwares which will help us code and subcode even our text of the open-ended questions, and then we could analyze it, but then it takes a lot of time. Yeah. Even if you look at the interview method, yeah, there are a lot of studies where they use mixed method, where they do the survey research, then they either have a small focus group or in-depth interview, which is done with people. And in-depth interview is because it forces the subjects to think of multiple alternatives when rendering judgments, and this should be done with a cross section of people to get them to express views about a particular issue or a person. Now, these kind of dilemmas, whom to interview, how to interview, all those will always exist while we are doing practical research. But these survey techniques of questionnaire can also be supplemented with interviews and focus groups to make it more specific, and therefore this will help the researcher to detect any pattern of reaction to specific messages and the types of individuals who are most likely to exhibit these patterns. Yeah. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, the content analysis. Now, content analysis is something that you've seen that most of the initial studies of political communication, they basically content, they did content analysis, but content analysis is also, not only about the written communication, but today we also have the audio visual content analysis, which is being done. And if you look at social media, a lot of this social media content is also being analyzed in terms of using rhetoric or semiotics or discourse analysis. A lot of methods can be used for content analysis, and content analysis is of two kinds: quantitative content analysis and qualitative content analysis. And often we find that the strength in content analysis is when you do both qualitative and quantitative. Now, qualitative content analysis is basically the content of the report, the interview, the focus group transcripts, and other messages that you collect by interacting with people, about their lives, about their opinion. And we do not have any very specific criteria, but we need to have certain criterias that, what are we going to ask people? What is the things that we are analyzing for, we are looking for? And the qualitative content analysis also has an advantage, is that it allows the researcher to employ many of the intuitive skills for message interpretation that human possesses. And this skill includes understanding the connotations that are attached to messages, sensing their emotional impact, and spinning out widely believed implications and their consequences. Although, these kind of judgments will also be influenced by the individual attitudes and opinions, but they also will reflect the collective memories of those communities. On the other hand, the quantitative content analysis, is basically about measuring. It is minimally judgmental, and it has a criteria for defining the message elements to be detected and indicators that signals the presence or the absence of these elements. And the selection criteria for examining the content is always pre-decided. Now, most of the time what happens is that we need to have a mixture, but some of the studies you will find that they have either did only quantitative or only qualitative, some of the earlier studies. Now, you will find now currently in most of the studies, if you look at the political communication journal or others, that there is a mixture of the methods. In fact, a lot of social media studies on political communication uses both these techniques, and also the way the content is analyzed qualitatively is either using, if it is just a text, it is using rhetoric or discourse. If it is an audiovisual content, then they use semantics. And there has been studies of also analyzing how leaders have framed themselves on television, how they project themselves on television. And that's how you will also find that, in fact, somebody who's interested in research should do on our Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, the way he projects himself in front of the camera. He's completely changed that dimension over the years. And you need to, there's a very fertile area that somebody can take up. I've been thinking for some time, but have not been able to do it. But I think, if you could get all the past records from one of the television channels and just see that, his demeanor, his clothing, his kind of messages that he, when he is going to talk about what does he do and how his look has evolved over these years. And it will also have a lot to do with the, other socio-political setting in the country. So, those kind of studies can also be done under content analysis. If you look at today's social media content analysis, there's a lot of softwares which is available today. Today researchers don't have to sit with a paper and pencil with people to think about coding, then intercodal reliability and things. Today you have a software which will help you do these things, and then it's only your analysis which you can look at it from that point of view. So with the help of softwares like Atlas TI, Nevo, and there may be many more other softwares also which help you get to do content analysis in a much more scientific manner. Yeah, the next slide. Yeah, coming to the network analysis, the technique of network analysis, because we know that in political communication, it is not just one person, one word flow. There are a lot of other things which influence a people's decision. Yeah, in the Penn State, in the, Erie County studies, Penn studies, both of this, you found that there was also interpersonal communication which was affecting. There was also other kind of behaviors that were affecting people's ideas. And therefore, and the information does not flow through only one channel. It flows from various channels. today, if you look at a political, campaign, it does not just come from television or from social media. There's also your newspaper. There's also your radio. There's also people around you who are talking about it. And there's so many different sources through which one forms an opinion. And therefore, these sources, from which influences your opinion, becomes your nodes. And the network of this interdependent nodes is what network analysis basically is, emphasizing on. In fact, network analysis, it looks at the message sender, the receiver, and they also look at the total universe. They do not just look at these two people separately. They look at the total universe there and treats everybody in that universe to be related somehow to each other, to be dependent on each other. And therefore, they are not, they're not talking of individual networks, but they're talking of the political situation as such. And therefore, the interaction that happens between groups, within groups, all this formal, informal, groups, even individual networks, they vary from time to time. And that is why panel studies would really be helpful in this kind of a network analysis. And, sometimes what happens in network analysis, you may focus on channels of communication within large political units like a state or a single public agency, or even a number of groups that have created a network of lobbying organizations to promote a passage of a specific law. There's so many cases of laws that are being made in the country. How did those come into? That's where your advocacy groups come into existence. How did a series of MC Mehta cases where against the Union of India, get into becoming the environmental law in the country? And is it really being implemented today? These are some examples that one can do for network analysis. In fact, Robert Bales has, really done a lot of work on interaction process analysis. And that is what, developed into this network analysis. In fact, in the Bales technique, he classifies, with verbal interactions with 12 different categories and predicts success rates of dealings within small groups based on those data. And deciding on the level of analysis, whether we want to limit it to which area, which group, that itself is a big challenge that a researcher would face in this kind of a situation. Whether you want to, but depending on what one is analyzing, the universe can be decided accordingly. And this, in the network analysis, what is used is you can use questionnaires, you can use diaries, you can use interviews, you can use focus group, you can use on-site observations of the routes that these messages take in linking the message, the sender and the receiver. And these data are gathered from every member of the organization, either through random sampling or a purposive sampling. And they also the researchers will need to ascertain that how often these network members communicate with specific individuals and what kind of information is conveyed in this. Yeah. And it may be also useful to distinguish between, work related, social messages, and things of that kind. And that will help you in this method, network analysis. a lot of archival data can also be used to, study about different kinds of political growth or decline and things of that kind. And today, computers also help us in identifying a lot of formal and informal networks that one can do. And also with the help of factor analysis, spatial analysis, sociometric analysis, modeling techniques, also contribute in a way to the network analysis and help us frame our assumptions and draw statistical inferences from it. Yeah, the next.
Ma'am, sorry to interrupt. I want to say something, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, one of the participants, they have written in the chat box, like Swapnil sir, he's saying that is the network analysis associated with actor network theory.
Yes, to a great extent, yes. You can use it. It can be associated with that. Network analysis is only a method, but the active network theory is what you can base it on your theoretical framework.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah, the experimental method, it's basically from the name itself that, you can have people who are not exposed to it and people who are exposed to certain messages and monitor them and find out, what has affected whom and things, how and things of that kind. But it's a little difficult because, it's also about how do you control the stimuli to which the research subjects are to be exposed. And especially, people get a lot of stimuli in their natural surroundings. And when the researchers, interact with them, how do they realize that, people are not exposed to certain things and how people are exposed to certain things? Like, this study can be done by, making a group of people who are exposed to the election campaign. And, but how do you do it? You show the election campaign to them and ask them their opinions about the campaign after they've viewed it, and then same on the same subject, you ask others who haven't seen the campaign. Now, these kind of things are being conducted. In fact, Shanto Iyengar research shows that, if you have demographically sound samples and people who can be easily recruited, people should agree to be part of your study. Obviously, there is a digital divide. He agrees to it that there is a digital divide, but in spite of that, these studies can be conducted. Experimental studies can also be conducted online, and that would also help us, get into a lot of things that we are not clear about, or how does a particular stimuli affect one group of people and not affect the other group of people. Yeah, and yes, when you're doing human behavior, the behavior could change even while we are doing the study because of some kind of external stimuli that could have happened at that point of time. But experimental methods are also being followed in political communication research. You can have a control group, you can have an experimental group, you can have, various sizes of these groups, people of various levels who are exposed to a particular phenomena and things of that kind. Can I have the next slide? Yeah. So what remains, or what is the future ahead for political communication? The basic research approaches which we have used in the recent decades will remain, but they will continue to undergo constant refinement. As you've seen in the past, we have new statistical processes, procedures and processes which have emerged. The old ones have faded. Like the survey and interview techniques, we've been talking about, I don't know, since the 1930s and 40s, but their usage on message effect studies has also been refined in various ways. Electronic monitoring devices and computer stimulations will, are likely to get more importance in research when you look at brain functions, when, if the brain can detect certain words, their synonyms, and determine, the networks through which their meanings are being conversed. And therefore, it will employ a multiplicity of methods in data analysis and data gathering. And part of it will always remain borrowed from other disciplines and sub-disciplines. In fact, if you are talking of computer stimulation, we would also be borrowing something from neurosciences. And like today, when we're talking of artificial intelligence and all those kind of things, we are going to borrow from computer science also. So it's a very fertile field, which is, changing. But, the older methods are still being followed with newer ones being added. And I think that's all I have to say. I can answer your question answers.
Thank you, ma'am, for the session. It was really very informative. So I request all the participants to please, raise their hands if they have any question, or they can type out in the chat box, and then we'll. So, ma'am, we have our colleague Nitesh Tripathi, sir. So he wants to ask a question. Yeah, please unmute yourself, Nitesh.
Hello, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, ma'am. Ma'am, we were discussing about this political communication. It is in this context, it has been my observation that there has been an increase, or rather a shift from issue-based politics to rhetoric-based politics. So, it's more about अच्छे दिन आने वाले हैं और मैं भी चौकीदार या फिर चौकीदार चोर है. These are the discussions we have rather than issues. So, I want your opinion on that. And there is another question related to this. If, as a researcher, I want to do research on rhetoric communication in politics, what would be a suitable methodology apart from content analysis? Because I think it's very basic and it's not going to cover every dimensions related to rhetorics.
You need to understand that how the political messages have shifted from over a period of time. Okay. When, the अच्छे दिन आने वाले हैं, or अच्छे दिन, what is it trying to give people through it? It's trying to give people a hope. Yeah. That, okay, you will have better days ahead to come. And, you can do it through the rhetoric analysis only. When are these words, being used in what context? Yeah. And the impact of this is that, okay, one is, you do the rhetoric analysis of these messages, not only the words, but in the context in which these words are spoken. And when are they used more? When are they used less? We've seen in that there is a context in which those words get used most. And why? And if you want to know why, you either need to, have an interview, if you can, with their speech writers, because they all have people who write their speeches and help them in framing their speeches. And that is also based on, a lot of work that goes background.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. And also then you combine it with, the content and the rhetoric analysis with interviews of those people, as well as the interviews on some, focus group with some audience, the people who are responding, people who are responsible for whom this message is being conveyed. And I think then you will be able to get a 360-degree view of why, people have shifted, from why political messages are now more, not issue based, but rhetoric based.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Very well explained. Thank you, ma'am.
So, ma'am, we have one more question from Swapnil Kamble, sir. He says, how can we study the political communication campaign of BJP from 2014 and 2019, that time gap?
Yeah, you can do a panel study. It will be nice, that in 2004, what were they saying? And 2014, what are they saying? And, you will have to do, all said and done, you will have to do a content analysis first. How you do a content analysis of all their campaign material will also, give you an idea, because before you go out and conduct other kind of analysis, whether it's a network analysis or your survey, you need to first do the content analysis. All said and done, the content analysis is very important in political communication, because we need to know what the intent of the content of the message is and what is the intent of the message. Then only, you can go ahead and then do the other kind of research. And obviously, you should, there has been 2 studies on BJP, one is by Sumit Pandey, who was the executive editor of CNN. And there's also a lot of studies on the Hindi media and the rise of BJP by Ayazi. He was with Jamia earlier, now he's with the National University of Singapore. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. So there's another person who's asking a question. So Momita Dedas, ma'am, who is our colleague, she writes, what will be the best research methodology to study political cartoons or political memes or political speeches?
I think political cartoons and political memes, Momita.
Ma'am, sorry to interrupt again. I think Momita ma'am wants to come on camera as well. Yeah, Momita ma'am, please go ahead.
Thank you, ma'am, for this wonderful session. It was like attending a class which nobody would like to miss, Thank you so much for your precious time. My question is, being a student of international relations, I have interest in political communication, but I'm very new to this area of study. How to study or political cartoons or political memes or political speeches? Like, there are so many avenues, especially we can take up Twitter or Facebook. Which is the best method you think that these political leaders after 2014 BJP came to power, it changed the entire dynamics of political communication. Political parties started to have their own social media platforms and all. So how do you think that the best methodology for studying this is, if I think that to take up in...
See, since 2000, it's not only BJP, it's since 2000 world across, you find that political leaders, whether it is, that's what I said in the beginning also, that whether it was at the local level or at the national level and regional level, all political people who had ambitions, and that's how even your organizations like ISI and other terrorist organizations, they have come onto the web internet. Yeah, and this kind of provides you with a lot of material which is there, because they feel that they do not need a via medium to reach people. They, rise of the internet and the rise of the political actors and non-political actors on social media or on the World Wide Web is basically because they can directly reach people. They don't need a via medium, a newspaper or a radio or a television channel. Yeah, so it gives them a sort of a personalized one-way communication. And it is not one way because people can respond. Yeah. Now, as far as you asked me 3 different things, Mamita, so I'll talk about those 3 things separately. It's nice to know that you have an inclination in international relations, and it's very important today that we study political communication from also an international relations perspective. And there's a lot of studies which is in political communication about it, which I did not discuss because I wanted to be only those which form the basis for these methods that we are using today in political communication. There's a lot of studies on populism and the growth of the right-wing politics across the world. You can see them in the Political Communication Journal. To study means I feel that, semiotics would be the best way. Yeah, and cartoons, because, it may not, there's a lot of underlying meaning to what it is trying to convey. And you need to discuss it or analyze it in the light of the happenings for which this cartoon or meme came up. Yeah. So semiotics would be an ideal way to study it, in my opinion. As far as, your speeches are concerned, okay, you could use discourse analysis or rhetoric. Or, in certain kind of speeches, one can even use deconstruction. Yeah, because, sometimes what happens, they're coming up from a specific thing to, trying to generalize and argue about certain things. So it depends on the kind of speeches that you want to analyze. But speeches, I feel, rhetoric and discourse would help you much better, because then you can, analyze it, go into the layers and analyze it. I hope I have satisfied,
Thank you, ma'am. I'll get in touch with you later on with this.
Thank you.
So, ma'am, Swapnil sir, he writes in the chat box, great, I will definitely work on it. Thank you very much for the wonderful ideas and the study material, madam. So that's what he writes over here. So anyone else who wants to ask a question, please raise your hand. Or you can write a question in the chat box. Anyone?
For all of you who are interested in political communication, I would, suggest that please refer the journal Political Communication itself. And also, there are very good and very relevant handbooks of political communication, which is there. There are 2 volumes of it. And in fact, there is a handbook on research methods in political communication. In fact, my primary reference has been that. From there only, I've tried to, put little things together, which I thought I could cover up in 1 hour, because putting together a 600-page book in 1 hour is a very difficult task. So I just picked up the main or the most important things that I thought I could convey to all of you.
Okay, great, ma'am. That will be a great help, because we also work on this area sometimes. We write certain papers, so that will be a great help. So we can refer to that. Thank you so much, ma'am. Okay, so thank you, ma'am, for the very informative session. You acquainted us with the concepts of political communication and how they came into being, Harold Laswell's propaganda analysis, Lazofield's Erie County study, and many more. All are very important things to know. You also discussed the process of doing research through the survey method. While we may be working on a topic related to the political communication sphere, also interviews and focused group discussions add to the research which are being conducted. You explained at length about the content analysis method for audiovisual and social media. Rhetoric, semiotic analysis, and social media research were very important concepts to know about. You rightly pointed out that new statistical analysis procedures will bloom, and new techniques with use of artificial intelligence and ICT tools are definitely going to come up in the future. So, ma'am, thank you so much for the very informative, and it was a wonderful session. It was lovely to attend your session. As Momita ma'am said, it was like we are listening to a teacher. So, thank you so much, ma'am.